Greg Wells cursed under his breath as the purple liquid splashed across Yaxa's shimmering, tentacle-like lower body. The Prylorian noble's eyes widened, all four of them fixed on the spreading stain. The royal palace's reception hall fell silent. "I'm terribly sorry," Greg said, grabbing a napkin from a nearby table. He knelt, dabbing at the mess. His human legs bent at angles unfamiliar to the gathered Prylorians, drawing curious glances. Yaxa's tentacles shifted, coiling around Greg's arm. "Fascinating," she murmured. "Your lower appendages, they're so rigid." Greg stood, acutely aware of the attention focused on him. As Earth's diplomatic representative on Pryloria, he knew the importance of maintaining good relations. The recent message from Central Command echoed in his mind. Rising tensions, territorial dispute in the Centauri system. Maintain diplomatic relations at all costs. "Perhaps we could discuss human anatomy in private," Yaxa suggested, her voice low. "For scientific purposes, of course." Greg hesitated. The offer seemed innocent enough, but something in Yaxa's tone set him on edge. Still, refusing could be seen as an insult. "Of course," he replied, forcing a smile. "I'd be happy to satisfy your curiosity." As Yaxa slithered away, Greg noticed her exchange a meaningful glance with another Prylorian. The other alien nodded subtly, its tentacles twitching in what Greg had learned was a sign of excitement. The reception continued, but Greg's mind raced. He'd heard rumors of a secret Prylorian faction, one that sought to advance their species through genetic manipulation. Could Yaxa be involved? And if so, what did that mean for his upcoming private meeting? Greg's communicator buzzed. Another message from Earth. "Situation deteriorating. Maintain positive relations with Prylorian nobles. Failure, not an option." He glanced across the room at Yaxa, who was now deep in conversation with a group of high-ranking officials. Her tentacles moved in intricate patterns, a form of nonverbal communication Greg had yet to fully decipher. As the night wore on, Greg found himself cornered by various Prylorian nobles, all suddenly fascinated by his bipedal nature. He answered their questions as best he could, all the while watching Yaxa from the corner of his eye. Finally, as the reception drew to a close, Yaxa approached him again. "I look forward to our private meeting, Diplomat Wells," she said, her voice silky smooth. "I'm particularly interested in examining the thing between your legs." Greg choked on his drink. "Excuse me?" Yaxa's tentacles rippled with amusement. "Your knees, of course. Such fascinating joints. I've never seen anything like them." As Greg watched Yaxa glide away, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking into a trap. But with interstellar tensions rising and explicit orders to maintain diplomatic relations, what choice did he have? Little did Greg know, in a secret chamber deep beneath the palace, Yaxa was already reporting to her faction leaders. "The human has agreed to a private meeting," she announced triumphantly. "Soon we'll have the genetic material we need to create our super soldiers." The faction leader's tentacles writhed with anticipation. "Excellent. Use any means necessary to obtain samples. The future of our species depends on it." As Greg left the reception, unaware of the web of deception closing in around him, one thought dominated his mind. How could he navigate this delicate situation without compromising Earth's interests or his own integrity? The answer, he feared, might lie in the very anatomy that had captured Yaxa's attention, and in his ability to use those legs to run if things went south. Greg's heart raced as he approached the designated meeting place, a secluded botanical garden nestled within the Prylorian royal palace. The alien flora surrounding him seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy, creating an atmosphere both beautiful and unsettling. As he rounded a corner, Greg saw Yaxa waiting for him. Her tentacle-like lower body undulated gracefully as she glided towards him, her four eyes fixed on his bipedal form. "Diplomat Wells," Yaxa purred, her voice as smooth as silk. "I'm so pleased you could join me." Greg nodded, forcing a smile. "It's my pleasure, noble Yaxa. This garden is quite remarkable." Yaxa's tentacles rippled, a gesture Greg had come to recognize as excitement. "Indeed, but not nearly as remarkable as your fascinating anatomy. Would you indulge my curiosity and allow me a closer examination of your legs? Remembering his orders to maintain diplomatic relations, Greg hesitated only briefly before nodding. Of course, for scientific purposes, as you said. He watched warily as Yaxa's tentacles reached out, gently probing his legs. The touch was surprisingly warm and soft, sending an unexpected shiver up his spine. Greg felt a mix of discomfort and something else, a strange, tingling sensation that he couldn't quite place. Fascinating, Yaxa murmured, her tentacles exploring the contours of his calves and thighs. The rigidity, yet flexibility, truly remarkable. Greg's breath caught in his throat as one of Yaxa's tentacles brushed against a particularly sensitive spot behind his knee. The sensation caught him off guard, momentarily clouding his thoughts. In that instant of distraction, Yaxa's movements changed. Greg felt a sharp pain in his calf, causing him to jerk away. "What was that?" he demanded, looking down to see a small device in one of Yaxa's tentacles, a tiny sample of his tissue visible within. Yaxa's eyes gleamed with triumph. "My apologies, Diplomat Wells, but this sample is crucial for our plans." Realization dawned on Greg. "You're part of that secret faction, aren't you? The ones seeking to advance your species through genetic manipulation." "Perceptive," Yaxa replied, her tentacles now coiling around Greg's legs, immobilizing him. "Our faction seeks to create super soldiers using human genetics. Your sample will be invaluable." Greg struggled against her grip, his diplomatic training warring with his instinct for self-preservation. "Yaxa, think about what you're doing. This could destroy the peace between our species." As he fought to free himself, Greg's hand brushed against his communicator, unknowingly activating a hidden emergency beacon. Miles away at the human embassy, an alarm blared to life. Yaxa's tentacles tightened, causing Greg to gasp in pain. Yet even as he winced, he couldn't ignore the strange sensations coursing through his body. The prolonged contact with Yaxa's alien physiology was affecting him in ways he never expected. "It doesn't have to be this way," Greg said, his voice strained. "We could work together, find a way to benefit both our species without resorting to theft and deception." For a moment, Yaxa's grip loosened. Her eyes met Greg's, and he saw a flicker of uncertainty. "You don't understand," she said softly. "The pressure from my faction, the expectations." Greg seized the opportunity, both physically and diplomatically. "Then help me understand. Let's talk about this. Find a solution that doesn't end in conflict." Before Yaxa could respond, the garden erupted into chaos. Human security forces, led by Lieutenant Sarah Burns, burst onto the scene, weapons drawn. Simultaneously, Prylorian royal guards appeared, their tentacles dripping with defensive postures. "Release the diplomat immediately," Lieutenant Burns shouted, her laser pistol aimed at Yaxa. The Prylorian guard captain's tentacles writhed menacingly. "Lower your weapons, humans, or face the consequences of violating our sovereign territory." Greg found himself at the center of a potential interstellar incident, the delicate peace between humans and Prylorians hanging by a thread. He looked at Yaxa, seeing the conflict in her eyes, then at the opposing security forces, fingers and tentacles hovering over triggers. "Everyone, stand down," Greg shouted, surprising himself with the authority in his voice. "This is a misunderstanding that we can purpose peacefully." Ambassador Marcus Steele strode into the garden, his expression a mix of concern and anger. "Diplomat Wells, explain this situation immediately." Greg took a deep breath, acutely aware of the weight of the moment. The genetic sample in Yaxa's possession, his own conflicted feelings, the guns and alien weapons pointed in all directions. It all came down to his next words. "Ambassador," Greg began, his mind racing to find a solution that could salvage this diplomatic nightmare. "What we have here is an opportunity to bridge the gap between our species in ways we never imagined possible." As all eyes and sensory organs focused on him, Greg realized that the future of human-Prylorian relations now rested squarely on his shoulders. The serenity of the botanical garden stood in stark contrast to the tension permeating the air, a reminder of how quickly peace could give way to conflict. Greg glanced at Yaxa, seeing a mixture of fear, regret, and something else in her alien eyes, something that mirrored his own confused emotions. He knew that his next actions would determine not only his fate, but potentially the fate of two entire species. With a deep breath, Greg prepared to navigate the most challenging diplomatic waters of his career, knowing that one wrong move could plunge both worlds into chaos. "Everyone, stand down!" Ambassador Marcus Steele's authoritative voice cut through the tension. He strode into the garden, his gaze sweeping over the assembled forces. "Lower your weapons immediately. This is a diplomatic situation, not a battlefield." The human security team hesitated, their laser pistols still trained on Yaxa. The Prylorian Royal Guard's tentacles remained coiled in defensive postures. "Now!" Steele barked, his tone brooking no argument. Slowly, weapons on both sides lowered. The air in the garden remained thick with tension, but the immediate threat of violence dissipated. Steele turned to Greg, who still stood with Yaxa's tentacles loosely coiled around his legs. "Diplomat Wells, explain this situation immediately." Greg took a deep breath, acutely aware of the weight of the moment. He gently disentangled himself from Yaxa's grip, noting the conflicted look in her four eyes. "Ambassador," Greg began, his voice steady despite his racing heart, "what we have here is an opportunity to bridge the gap between our species in ways we never imagined possible." He proceeded to explain Yaxa's true identity as a member of a secret Prylorian faction and their plan to use human genetic material for military purposes. As he spoke, Yaxa's tentacles writhed nervously, her eyes darting between Greg and the ambassador. When Greg finished, Steele's expression was a mix of concern and intrigue. He turned to Yaxa, his gaze penetrating. "Is this true?" Yaxa's tentacles coiled tightly around herself, a gesture Greg had come to recognize as discomfort. She looked at Greg, then back at the ambassador. In that moment, something shifted in her demeanor. "Yes," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's true." To everyone's surprise, Yaxa reached into a hidden compartment within her tentacles and produced the vial containing Greg's genetic sample. She held it out to Ambassador Steele. "I surrender this to you," she said, her voice stronger now, "and I offer my full cooperation in exposing the faction's activities." The Prylorian Royal Guards exchanged alarmed looks, their tentacles twitching in agitation. It was clear they had been unaware of the faction's existence within their ranks. Ambassador Steele took the vial, his expression thoughtful. "This is a serious matter that requires immediate attention at the highest levels." He turned to the Prylorian Guard captain. "I request an immediate audience with King Zorgax." The captain's tentacles rippled in what Greg recognized as uncertainty. "This is highly irregular, but given the circumstances..." He paused, then nodded. "Follow me." As they made their way through the winding corridors of the royal palace, Greg found himself walking beside Yaxa. The Prylorian noble's tentacles moved listlessly, her usual grace replaced by a dejected slump. "Why did you do it?" Greg asked softly, careful not to be overheard. Yaxa's eyes met his, filled with a complexity of emotions Greg couldn't fully decipher. "Because you were right," she whispered. "This deception, it wasn't the way, and I couldn't bear the thought of causing you harm." Before Greg could respond, they arrived at the grand doors of the Royal Council chambers. The doors swung open, revealing a vast circular room dominated by a massive holographic display of the Prylorian star system. King Zorgax, an imposing figure with iridescent tentacles and 6 piercing eyes, sat upon a raised dais. His gaze swept over the group as they entered, lingering on Greg and Yaxa. "Ambassador Steele," the king's voice resonated through the chamber, "I understand you have urgent matters to discuss." As Steele stepped forward to explain the situation, Greg watched King Zorgax's reaction closely. The Prylorian ruler's tentacles twitched and coiled as he listened, his eyes narrowing at the mention of the secret faction. When Steele finished, King Zorgax's tentacles lashed out in a gesture Greg had never seen before. "This is deeply troubling," the king declared. "I will order an immediate investigation into the extent of this faction's influence and activities." The king's gaze settled on Yaxa, who visibly wilted under his scrutiny. "As for you, noble Yaxa, Your actions are a grave betrayal of our people's trust. However, he paused, his tentacles undulating thoughtfully. Your willingness to come forward may yet count in your favor. Greg stepped forward, his heart pounding. Your Majesty, if I may speak on Yaxa's behalf? King Zorgax's eyes swiveled to Greg, curiosity evident in their alien depths. Proceed, Diplomat Wells. Yaxa's actions, while initially misguided, ultimately led to the exposure of a threat to both our peoples, Greg said, surprised by the passion in his own voice. Her cooperation could be invaluable in rooting out the remaining members of this faction. I believe she deserves leniency in light of her change of heart. The king's tentacles rippled, a gesture Greg couldn't interpret. Your compassion is noted, Diplomat Wells. I will take it into consideration when determining Yaxa's fate. Before the discussion could continue, a Prelorian officer burst into the chamber, his tentacles flailing in agitation. Your Majesty, we've detected unusual activity in the Centauri system. Unidentified ships have entered the contested space. The holographic display in the center of the room shifted, zooming in on the star system in question. Strange, angular vessels, unlike any human or Prelorian design, moved through the starfield. King Zorgax's tentacles coiled tightly. This changes everything, he said, his voice grave. We may be facing an external threat that endangers both our peoples. Ambassador Steele stepped forward, his expression resolute. Then perhaps it's time we set aside our differences and face this threat together. I propose a joint human Prelorian task force to investigate these ships and determine their intentions. The king's tentacles relaxed slightly as he considered the proposal. After a moment, he nodded. Agreed. We must combine our resources and expertise if we are to uncover the truth behind this incursion. Greg felt a surge of anticipation as King Zorgax's gaze fell upon him. Diplomat Wells, given your unique position and recent experiences, I believe you would be an ideal liaison for this task force. Do you accept this responsibility? Greg nodded, acutely aware of Yaxa's presence beside him. I do, Your Majesty. As preparations for the joint mission began, Greg found himself working closely with Yaxa, whose knowledge of Prelorian technology proved invaluable. Despite the circumstances that had brought them together, Greg couldn't deny the growing connection between them. Days later, as they boarded the advanced scout ship that would take them to the contested star system, Greg caught Yaxa's eye. Her tentacles curled in a gesture he now recognized as a smile. Ready for our next adventure, Diplomat Wells? She asked, a hint of her old confidence returning. Greg grinned, feeling a mix of excitement and trepidation as he looked out at the stars. As ready as I'll ever be, he replied, knowing that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Greg grinned, feeling a mix of excitement and trepidation as he looked out at the stars. As ready as I'll ever be, he replied, knowing that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The scout ship's engines hummed to life, propelling them into the vast expanse of space. As they approached the edge of the contested star system, the ship's sensors began to light up with activity. Energy signature detected, reported Lieutenant Sarah Burns, her eyes fixed on the holographic display. It's massive, unlike anything we've seen before. Greg leaned forward, studying the readout. Can you pinpoint the source? Sarah's fingers danced across the control panel. It appears to be coming from an asteroid field? That can't be right. Yaxa slithered closer, her tentacles curling with interest. Perhaps it is not a natural formation, she suggested, her four eyes blinking in rapid succession. As they drew nearer, the ship's sensors revealed a hidden base built into the largest asteroid. The unidentified vessels they had detected earlier seemed to be originating from this location. Greg exchanged a glance with Yaxa, seeing his own willpower reflected in her alien eyes. We need to investigate, he said, turning to address the mixed human Prelorian crew. Yaxa and I will lead a reconnaissance team. The rest of you, stay alert and be prepared for anything. As they donned their environmental suits, Greg couldn't help but notice how Yaxa's tentacles gracefully wove through the specially designed openings. It was a stark reminder of their differences, yet he found himself admiring the fluid efficiency of her movements. The team made their way through the airlock and onto the asteroid's surface. Greg's magnetic boots clanked against the rocky terrain, while Yaxa's tentacles seemed to find purchase on even the smoothest surfaces. "Watch your step," Greg warned as they approached a particularly treacherous section. "The gravity here is—" Before he could finish, his foot slipped on a loose stone. In an instant, Yaxa's tentacles shot out, wrapping around his waist and steadying him. "Thank you," Greg said, his heart racing from more than just the near fall. Yaxa's eyes crinkled in what he now recognized as a smile. "Perhaps it is you who should watch your step, Diplomat Wells." As they neared the hidden base, Greg raised his hand, signaling the team to halt. Ahead, a sleek metal structure protruded from the asteroid's surface, its design unlike anything human or Prelorian. "Look at those security measures," Yaxa whispered, her tentacles pointing to barely visible energy fields and sensor arrays. "This technology is far beyond our own." Greg nodded, his mind racing. "We'll need to find a way to bypass them without alerting whoever's inside." He studied the layout, looking for any weaknesses. "There, see that maintenance hatch? If we can reach it without triggering the sensors, we might have a way in." With careful coordination, the team made their way towards the hatch. Greg's quick thinking and Yaxa's dexterous tentacles proved invaluable as they navigated the security measures. Finally, they stood before the entrance to the mysterious base. As the hatch slid open, they were greeted by a sight that took their breath away. The interior was a marvel of alien engineering, with pulsing energy conduits and strange, organic-looking computer interfaces. "By the star seas," Yaxa breathed, her tentacles curling in awe. They moved deeper into the facility, their footsteps echoing in the eerie silence. Greg couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, even though their sensors detected no life signs nearby. Suddenly, a door hissed open ahead of them, revealing a vast laboratory. Inside, strange creatures moved about with purpose, their bodies a bizarre fusion of mechanical and organic components. "What are they?" one of the team members whispered. Greg's eyes widened as he took in the scene. "I think we've just made first contact with an entirely new species." Yaxa's tentacles coiled tightly around herself, a gesture Greg had come to recognize as unease. "Look at those containment units," she said, pointing to a row of transparent cylinders. "Are those specimens?" Greg moved closer, his heart sinking as he realized what he was seeing. Inside the cylinders were various life forms, including what appeared to be a human and a Prelorian, suspended in a glowing liquid. "They're experimenting on us," he said, his voice tight with anger and disbelief. As they watched, one of the alien creatures approached a workstation. Its limbs, a hybrid of tentacles and mechanical appendages, manipulated holographic controls with startling precision. "We need to get closer," Greg whispered. "See if we can figure out what they're up to." Yaxa nodded, her eyes fixed on the alien scientist. "I'll create a distraction. You retrieve the data." Before Greg could protest, Yaxa had already slithered away, her tentacles propelling her with silent efficiency. Moments later, an alarm blared on the far side of the lab, drawing the attention of the alien researchers. Greg seized the opportunity, dashing to the nearest computer terminal. His fingers flew over the unfamiliar interface, guided by instinct and adrenaline. Data streamed across the screen, revealing the horrifying truth of the aliens' intentions. "They call themselves the Zarkoth," Greg muttered as he downloaded the information. "They're parasites, harvesting genetic material from other species to enhance their own abilities." A shout from across the lab caught his attention. The Zarkoth had discovered Yaxa and were converging on her position. Without hesitation, Greg drew his weapon and fired, creating a path for Yaxa to escape. "We need to go now," he yelled, grabbing the data crystal and sprinting towards the exit. As they ran, alarms blared throughout the facility. The team fought their way back to the surface, Zarkoth soldiers in hot pursuit. Greg and Yaxa found themselves fighting side by side, their movements in perfect sync as they protected each other and their teammates. Just as they reached their ship, a Zarkoth energy weapon struck the hull, causing a massive explosion. The force of the blast threw Greg and Yaxa to the ground, debris raining down around them. Greg's vision swam, pain lancing through his body. He tried to stand, but his legs wouldn't cooperate. Through the haze, he saw a Zarkoth soldier taking aim at Yaksa. With the last of his strength, Greg threw himself in front of her, feeling the searing heat of the energy blast as it struck his side. As consciousness faded, he felt Yaksa's tentacles wrap around him, lifting him with surprising gentleness. "Hold on, Greg." Yaksa's voice seemed to come from far away. "I've got you." The last thing Greg saw before darkness claimed him was the worried look in Yaksa's alien eyes, and he realized that somewhere along the way, he had come to trust her completely. Greg's consciousness flickered back to life, his senses gradually sharpening as he became aware of his surroundings. The first thing he noticed was the gentle pressure of Yaksa's tentacles supporting his body. He opened his eyes to find her alien face hovering above him, concern evident in her 4 eyes. "You're awake," Yaksa said, her voice a mixture of relief and worry. "How do you feel?" Greg attempted to sit up, wincing as pain lanced through his side. "Like I've been hit by a plasma cannon," he groaned. "But I'll live. Where are we?" Yaksa helped him into a sitting position, her tentacles moving with surprising gentleness. "We're on one of Pryloria's moons. The ship was damaged in our escape from the Zarkoth base. I managed to land us here, but we're stranded until repairs can be made." As Greg's vision cleared, he took in their surroundings. The scout ship lay a short distance away, its hull scorched and dented. The moon's barren landscape stretched out around them, a sea of gray punctuated by jagged rock formations. "We should get to work on those repairs," Greg said, attempting to stand. Yaksa steadied him as he swayed on his feet. "First, we need to tend to your injuries," she insisted, guiding him back to the ship. As Yaksa applied a healing salve to Greg's wounds, he couldn't help but notice the dexterity of her tentacles. What once seemed alien now felt comforting, even reassuring. Over the next few hours, they worked side by side on repairing the ship. Greg's diplomatic skills proved useful in problem-solving, while Yaksa's technical expertise was invaluable. As they worked, Greg found himself admiring the fluid grace of Yaksa's movements. Their progress was interrupted by a startling discovery. Yaksa's tentacles froze mid-motion as she stared at something in the distance. "Greg," she whispered, "look at that rock formation. Does it seem unnatural to you?" Following her gaze, Greg squinted at the craggy outcropping. Upon closer inspection, he noticed the subtle symmetry of the structure. "It's too perfect," he agreed. "We should investigate." Approaching cautiously, they discovered a hidden entrance cleverly disguised among the rocks. Inside, they found a small outpost filled with advanced communication equipment. "This is Zarkoth technology," Yaksa said, her tentacles curling with excitement as she examined the consoles. "We might be able to use this to send a distress signal." Greg nodded, a plan forming in his mind. "If we can alert both human and Prylorian forces, we might have a chance against the Zarkoth." Working together, they managed to activate the communication array. Greg composed a carefully worded message, explaining their situation and the Zarkoth threat. As the signal was sent, a wave of hope washed over them. Their relief was short-lived. Alarms began blaring throughout the outpost, red lights flashing ominously. "The signal must have alerted the Zarkoth to our presence," Yaksa said, her tentacles coiling tightly in alarm. Greg's heart raced as he saw a small ship descending from the sky. "We need to move. Now!" They abandoned their repair efforts, grabbing what supplies they could as they fled the landing site. The moon's rugged terrain made for difficult travel, but they pushed on, driven by the sound of the approaching Zarkoth scout ship. As they crested a hill, Greg spotted a network of cave openings in the distance. "There," he pointed. "We can lose them in those caves." They had barely made it into the cave system when they heard the whine of Zarkoth energy weapons. Ducking deeper into the tunnels, they navigated by the dim light of their emergency lamps. The cave floor was treacherous, slick with some kind of alien moss. As they rounded a corner, Greg's foot slipped on a loose stone. He fell backwards, his leg twisting painfully as it was caught between two rocks. "Greg!" Yaksa exclaimed, her tentacles immediately wrapping around his torso to steady him. He tried to stand, but pain shot through his leg. "I think it's sprained," he grunted. Without hesitation, Yaksa used her tentacles to support Greg's weight. "Lean on me," she said. "We need to keep moving." As they made their way deeper into the caves, Greg found himself relying more and more on Yaxa's support. Her tentacles, strong yet gentle, held him securely as they navigated the uneven terrain. The sound of pursuit grew fainter as they delved further into the labyrinthine caverns. Finally, they reached a small chamber that seemed defensible. Yaxa helped Greg sit against the wall, her tentacles lingering on his shoulders for a moment longer than necessary. "Thank you," Greg said, looking up at her. In the dim light, he saw her alien features in a new light. The graceful curve of her tentacles, the depth in her four eyes. He found himself captivated. Yaxa's eyes blinked rapidly, a gesture Greg had come to recognize as her equivalent of a smile. "We make a good team, Diplomat Wells," she said softly. As they caught their breath, Greg noticed a faint glow emanating from a crevice in the far wall. "Yaxa, do you see that?" She turned, her tentacles reaching out to investigate. "There's something here," she said, her voice filled with curiosity. Together they widened the crevice, revealing a hidden chamber beyond. What they found inside would change everything. In the center of the chamber stood an ancient artifact, pulsing with an otherworldly energy. Its design was like nothing they had ever seen. Not human, not Prylorian, and certainly not Zarkoth. "What is it?" Greg breathed, limping closer to examine the strange device. Yaxa's tentacles waved in excitement. "I'm not sure, but its energy readings are off the charts. This technology, it's far beyond anything we've encountered." As Greg reached out to touch the artifact, neither of them could have predicted the extraordinary chain of events they were about to set in motion. Motion. A brilliant flash of light engulfed them, and Greg felt a surge of energy coursing through his body. The cave around them trembled, rocks cascading down as the artifact's power intensified. "We need to get out of here," Yaxa shouted, her tentacles wrapping securely around Greg's waist. As they fled the collapsing chamber, Greg realized something had changed. His injured leg no longer throbbed with pain, and he found himself moving with unexpected speed and agility. They emerged from the cave system just as the Zarkoth scout ship landed nearby. "The ship," Greg gasped, pointing to their damaged vessel. "Can we make it?" Yaxa's eyes widened as she assessed the situation. "I have an idea," she said, her tentacles gesturing towards the Zarkoth craft. Understanding dawned on Greg's face. With a nod, they sprinted towards the enemy ship, Greg marveling at his newfound strength and speed. As they approached, Yaxa's tentacles flew over the ship's external controls, bypassing security measures with astounding efficiency. The hatch opened, and they leaped inside, quickly overpowering the surprised Zarkoth pilot. Greg's enhanced reflexes proved invaluable as he helped Yaxa secure their prisoner and take control of the ship. "I hope you can fly this thing," Greg said, strapping himself into the co-pilot seat. Yaxa's tentacles danced across the alien controls. "It's not so different from our technology. Hold on." The ship lurched upward, breaking free of the moon's gravity well. As they entered orbit, Greg noticed Yaxa's tentacles twitching oddly. "Are you all right?" he asked, concerned. She blinked rapidly, her equivalent of a frown. "I'm sensing something. It's like I can feel the energy patterns of the ship, the communications arrays. It's overwhelming." Greg reached out, placing a hand on one of her tentacles. "Focus on flying. We'll figure this out once we're safe." As they approached Praloria, the planet's defense systems locked onto their ship. Greg quickly opened a channel, using his diplomatic skills to prevent them from being shot down. Their arrival caused immediate chaos, with both human and Prylorian officials scrambling to respond to the stolen Zarkoth vessel. Upon landing, they were quickly surrounded by armed guards. Greg stepped out first, hands raised. "I'm Diplomat Gregory Wells, and this is Yaxa of Praloria. We have vital information about a threat to both our species." King Zorgax himself arrived moments later, his regal bearing commanding respect, even in this tense situation. "Diplomat Wells, explain yourself immediately." Greg and Yaxa were escorted to a secure facility, where they briefed King Zorgax and the human diplomatic team on the Zarkoth threat. The revelation about Admiral Jonathan Hawke's involvement sent shockwaves through the human delegation. "This is preposterous," Ambassador Chen exclaimed. Admiral Hawk is one of our most decorated officers. Greg stood firm. I understand your disbelief, Ambassador, but the evidence is irrefutable. The Zarkoth have infiltrated both our societies at the highest levels. As the implications of their discovery sank in, Greg noticed the Prylorian scientist eyeing him curiously. He realized that his enhanced physical abilities hadn't gone unnoticed. If I may, one of the scientists interjected, we've noticed some anomalies in Diplomat Wells's physiology. With your permission, we'd like to conduct some tests. Before Greg could respond, Yaxa's tentacles suddenly went rigid. Her eyes darted around the room, focusing on seemingly empty spaces. There are hidden devices in this room, she announced, her voice tense. Communication devices of Zarkoth design. The room erupted into chaos as security teams swept the area. Within minutes, they uncovered several sophisticated listening devices, including one hidden on the person of a high-ranking Prylorian official. As the suspected infiltrator was led away, King Zorgax turned to Greg and Yaxa. It seems we owe you a great debt. Your actions have exposed a grave threat to both our peoples. The king's tentacles waved in a complex pattern, a gesture Greg had learned indicated deep thought among Prylorians. We must act decisively. I propose the formation of a joint task force, combining the strengths of both our species to counter this Zarkoth threat. Greg nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. I agree, Your Majesty, and if you'll have me, I'd be honored to lead the human contingent. Yaxa moved closer to Greg, her tentacles briefly brushing against his arm in a gesture that didn't go unnoticed by those present. I volunteer to lead the Prylorian team, she said. My new sensory abilities could prove invaluable in detecting further Zarkoth infiltration. As the meeting adjourned and preparations for the counteroffensive began, Greg and Yaxa found themselves working closely once again. They moved through the facility, discussing strategy and team composition, their movements in sync despite their physiological differences. You two work well together, observed Dr. Lena Costa, a human xenobiologist assigned to study Greg's enhanced abilities. It's quite remarkable, given the typical challenges of interspecies cooperation. Greg glanced at Yaxa, a small smile playing on his lips. We've been through a lot together. You learn to trust someone pretty quickly when you're facing down parasitic aliens. Yaxa's eyes blinked rapidly, her version of a chuckle. Indeed, though I must admit I never expected to find such a capable partner among the humans. As they continued their preparations, neither of them noticed the wary glances exchanged by some of the officials present. The closeness between the human diplomat and the Prylorian technician was becoming increasingly apparent, and not everyone was comfortable with the implications. Their planning session was interrupted by the arrival of Lieutenant Sarah Burns, who strode into the room with a determined expression. Diplomat Wells, she said, nodding curtly, I've brought additional evidence regarding Admiral Hawk and other suspected collaborators. Greg introduced Sarah to the group, noticing the way her eyes narrowed slightly when they fell on Yaxa. Despite the progress they'd made, it was clear that trust between their species remained fragile. As they pored over the new information, alarms suddenly blared throughout the facility. A young Prylorian burst into the room, his tentacles flailing in agitation. Your Majesty, he gasped, addressing King Zorgax, our long-range sensors have detected a large fleet entering the system. It's them. The Zarkoth have arrived. Greg and Yaxa exchanged a look, their earlier conversation about their feelings for each other pushed aside by the imminent threat. They moved as one towards the command center, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. As they entered the bustling control room, screens flickered to life, displaying the approaching Zarkoth armada. Greg felt Yaxa's tentacle brush against his hand, a silent gesture of support and solidarity. Well, Greg said, his voice steady despite the gravity of the situation, I guess it's time to see if this joint task force of ours is up to the challenge. Challenge? Greg's voice carried a quiet tenacity as he surveyed the tense faces around him. The command center erupted into a flurry of activity. Human and Prylorian officers worked side by side, their differences momentarily forgotten in the face of the looming threat. King Zorgax's tentacles waved intricate patterns as he conferred with his advisors, while the human diplomats huddled around communication arrays, relaying urgent messages to Earth. Greg felt a gentle pressure on his shoulder and turned to see Yaksa, her 4 eyes fixed on the main view screen. "We need to get out there," she said, her voice low but firm. He nodded, feeling a surge of energy coursing through his enhanced body. "Agreed. Let's show them what this alliance can do." They made their way to the hangar bay, where a sleek hybrid vessel awaited them. The ship was a marvel of human and Prelorian engineering, its hull gleaming with an otherworldly sheen. As they approached, Greg noticed how the control interfaces seemed to pulse with anticipation. Once inside the cockpit, Greg settled into the pilot's seat, marveling at how natural it felt despite the alien design. Yaksa took her place beside him, her tentacles splaying out to interface with the weapon systems. "All systems online," Yaksa reported, her voice tinged with excitement. "Weapon capacitors charging." Greg's hands danced across the controls, the ship responding to his touch with uncanny precision. "This is Diplomat Wells to all ships," he announced over the comm. "Form up and prepare to engage." The hangar bay doors slid open, revealing the vast expanse of space. The Zarkoth fleet loomed in the distance, a menacing array of biomechanical monstrosities. Greg took a deep breath, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. With a thought, he engaged the engines. The hybrid ship shot forward, leading the charge as the combined human Prelorian fleet fell into formation behind them. The space between the two forces rapidly diminished, and soon the first salvos of energy weapons crisscrossed the void. Greg's enhanced reflexes allowed him to weave through the barrage with astonishing agility. Beside him, Yaksa's tentacles blurred as she operated the weapon systems, unleashing precisely targeted blasts that shattered Zarkoth shields and punched through hulls. "Their left flank is weakening," Yaksa called out, her eyes darting between multiple displays. "If we concentrate our fire—" Her words were cut off by a violent shudder that ran through the ship. A proximity alert blared, warning of an incoming Zarkoth boarding party. "We can't let them get a foothold," Greg growled, his hands tightening on the controls. He executed a series of complex maneuvers, shaking off their pursuers and giving Yaksa a clear shot at the enemy boarding craft. As the battle raged on, Greg's communicator crackled to life. "Diplomat Wells, this is Lieutenant Burns. We have an urgent situation planetside." Greg's heart sank as he listened to Sarah's report. Admiral Hawk, free and armed with a prototype weapon that could turn the tide of the battle. The implications were staggering. He exchanged a look with Yaksa, seeing his own conflict mirrored in her alien features. They both knew what had to be done. "Yaksa, can you handle things here?" Greg asked, already knowing the answer. Her tentacles twitched in affirmation. "Go! Stop Hawk. I'll keep the Zarkoth occupied." With a heavy heart, Greg relinquished control of the ship to Yaksa. He made his way to the shuttle bay, assembling a small team of human and Prelorian operatives. As they prepared to depart, he cast one last glance at the main view screen, watching Yaksa expertly maneuver their ship through the chaos of battle. The shuttle detached from the flagship, streaking towards Preloria's surface. Greg's enhanced vision picked out the trail of Hawk's ship, leading them towards a dense asteroid field on the outskirts of the system. "Stay sharp," Greg warned his team as they entered the field. "Hawk knows these rocks better than anyone." They weaved through the asteroids, sensors straining to pick up any sign of Hawk's vessel. Suddenly, a massive structure loomed before them, nestled within a hollowed-out asteroid. Its architecture was unmistakably Zarkoth. "By the stars," breathed one of the Prelorian operatives. "A hidden base. The infiltration runs deeper than we imagined." Greg's teeth gritted as he guided the shuttle towards a concealed docking port. As they disembarked, weapons at the ready, his communicator chimed with an incoming transmission from the main battle. Yaksa's voice came through, strained and punctuated by static. "Greg, we've pushed them back, but at a cost. Many ships lost. My vessel, taking heavy damage. I've detected a weakness in their flagship, but—" The transmission cut off abruptly. Greg felt a cold knot of fear form in his stomach, but he forced it down. He had a mission to complete. "Let's move," he ordered, leading his team into the heart of the Zarkoth base. They encountered surprisingly little resistance as they made their way through the twisting corridors. The lack of opposition only heightened Greg's unease. Finally, they reached a vast chamber filled with pulsating organic technology. At its center stood Admiral Hawk, the stolen prototype weapon clutched in his hands. "I wondered when you'd show up, Wells," Hawk said, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. "Come to stop the inevitable?" Greg stepped forward, hands raised in a placating gesture. "It doesn't have to be this way, Admiral. Whatever the Zarkoth promised you, it's not worth betraying everything we stand for." Hawk's laugh was bitter. "Stand for? Open your eyes, boy. The galaxy is a cruel place. Humanity needs every advantage it can get to survive. The Zarkoth can give us that edge. Genetic enhancements, technology beyond our wildest dreams." "At what cost?" Greg countered, taking another step closer. "Our freedom? Our humanity? Look at what we've accomplished by working with the Prilorians. We're stronger together, Admiral. Cooperation, not subjugation, is the key to our survival." For a moment, doubt flickered across Hawk's face. Then his features hardened once more. "Pretty words, Wells, but words won't save us when the next threat comes knocking at our door." The standoff stretched on, tension building like a coiled spring. Greg's enhanced senses picked up every detail, the sweat beading on Hawk's brow, the subtle movements of his team taking up strategic positions, the faint tremors running through the base as the battle raged above. Suddenly, Greg's communicator crackled to life once more. "Greg," came Yaxa's voice, weak and filled with pain. "Zarkoth, counterattack. My ship. Critical hit. I don't think—" The transmission dissolved into static. Greg felt as if the floor had dropped out from under him. In that moment of distraction, Hawk made his move. The chamber erupted into chaos as energy weapons flared to life. Greg's team returned fire, forcing Hawk to take cover behind a cluster of pulsating organic columns. The prototype weapon lay on the floor between them, its sleek casing gleaming under the harsh light. Greg's mind raced. Yaxa was in danger. The entire fleet could be at risk. But if Hawk escaped with the weapon, all their sacrifices could be for nothing. He had to make a choice. With a surge of drive, Greg launched himself forward. His enhanced reflexes allowed him to dodge incoming fire as he closed the distance to Hawk. In a fluid motion, he scooped up the prototype weapon and brought it to bear on the Admiral. "It's over, Hawk," Greg said, his voice steady despite the turmoil in his heart. "Surrender now." Hawk's shoulders slumped in defeat. As Greg's team moved in to secure the Admiral, he activated his communicator. "This is Diplomat Wells. We have Hawk in custody and have secured the prototype weapon, requesting immediate extraction and deployment of the device against the Zarkoth fleet." As they made their way back to the shuttle, Greg's thoughts turned to Yaxa. He could only hope they weren't too late. The return journey to the main battle seemed to stretch on forever. Greg's enhanced legs carried him swiftly through the corridors of the flagship, ignoring the celebrations erupting around him as news of the Zarkoth defeat spread. His sole focus was reaching the medical bay where Yaxa fought for her life. As he burst through the doors, he was met with a scene of controlled chaos. Medical personnel, both human and Prilorian, worked feverishly around Yaxa's prone form. Her normally vibrant skin had taken on a sickly pallor, and her tentacles lay limp and unresponsive. "Status," Greg demanded, his voice barely above a whisper. A human doctor turned to him, her face grim. "It's not good, Diplomat Wells. The damage to her systems is extensive, and our knowledge of Prilorian physiology is limited, especially given her recent transformations. We're doing everything we can, but—" Greg's enhanced hearing picked up the faint, erratic rhythm of Yaxa's alien heartbeat. He moved to her side, gently taking one of her tentacles in his hand. "Hold on, Yaxa," he murmured. "We've come too far to give up now." As he stood there, feeling helpless despite all his newfound abilities, a thought struck him. The artifact that had changed them both, could it be the key to saving Yaxa's life? With renewed purpose, Greg strode out of the medical bay, his mind already formulating a plan. He would need King Zorgax's approval, a specialized team, and a lot of luck. But as he looked back at Yaxa's still form, he knew he would move heaven and earth to save her. the future of human-Prelorian relations, the aftermath of the Zarkoth invasion, even his own uncertain status, all of it would have to wait. For now, there was only one mission that mattered, returning to that fateful moon and retrieving the artifact that had started it all. As Greg began assembling his team, he couldn't help but wonder what other secrets the universe held, and what challenges lay ahead for this fledgling alliance of species. But those were questions for another day. Right now, every second counted in the race to save Yaxa's life. Greg's heart pounded as he raced through the corridors of the flagship, his enhanced legs carrying him swiftly towards the docking bay. The specialized team he had assembled was returning from their mission to retrieve the alien artifact, and every second counted in the fight to save Yaxa's life. As the docking bay doors slid open, Greg's enhanced vision immediately locked onto the artifact. It pulsed with an intense energy, casting an eerie glow throughout the cavernous space. Without a word, he motioned for the team to follow him, and they hurried towards the medical bay. The medical staff parted as Greg burst through the doors, the artifact held carefully in his hands. Yaxa lay motionless on the bed, her normally vibrant skin now pale and lifeless. Greg's throat tightened at the sight, but he pushed his emotions aside, focusing on the task at hand. "We need to position it near her," he instructed, working alongside the human and Prylorian scientists. With utmost care, they placed the artifact next to Yaxa's prone form. As they activated the device, a surge of energy filled the room. Greg felt it coursing through his body, and he instinctively reached out to touch Yaxa's tentacle. The moment their skin made contact, a brilliant light erupted from the artifact, enveloping them both. Greg heard gasps and shouts of surprise from the medical team, but their voices grew distant as he felt himself being pulled into somewhere else. When the light faded, he found himself in a strange, ethereal space. It was neither dark nor light, neither empty nor full, and he wasn't alone. "Yaxa?" he called out, his voice echoing strangely in this mental landscape. He felt her presence before he saw her, a familiar warmth that filled him with relief and joy. Then she was there, her four eyes blinking in confusion as she took in their surroundings. "Greg, where are we?" she asked, her voice clear despite her physical body's condition. "I'm not sure," he replied, moving closer to her. "I think the artifact created this shared space for us." As he spoke, he became aware of a strange sensation. He could feel the gentle sway of tentacles, the fluid grace of movement through water. But these weren't his sensations. They were Yaxa's. "I can feel what you feel," he said in wonder, watching as understanding dawned in Yaxa's eyes. "And I can feel the strength of your legs, the solidity of the ground beneath you," she marveled, her tentacles moving in an approximation of bipedal steps. Their minds merged further, memories and emotions flowing between them like water. Greg experienced the vastness of Pryloria's oceans through Yaxa's eyes, felt the joy of her first successful diplomatic mission. In turn, Yaxa felt the thrill of Greg's first space flight, the warmth of a summer day on Earth. As their connection deepened, Greg became aware of changes happening to their physical bodies. He could sense Yaxa's wounds healing, her life force growing stronger. At the same time, he felt a tingling sensation in his legs, as if they were evolving further. In the physical world, the medical team watched in amazement as Yaxa's body began to heal at an accelerated rate. Her tentacles regained their vibrant color, now adorned with iridescent patterns that seemed to shimmer and shift. Greg's legs, already enhanced from their previous encounter with the artifact, developed a subtle, scale-like texture that gleamed under the medical bay's lights. As the healing process concluded, Greg and Yaxa found themselves slowly returning to their bodies. The shared mental space faded away, replaced by the stark reality of the medical bay. Greg blinked, his enhanced vision adjusting quickly to the change in light. His eyes met Yaxa's, and he saw in them a depth of understanding and affection that took his breath away. Without a word, Yaxa reached out with her tentacles, gently caressing Greg's newly textured legs. "I think I finally understand the beauty of your bipedal form," she said softly, her voice filled with wonder. Greg smiled, running his hand along one of Yaxa's tentacles, marveling at the new iridescent patterns. "And I've never seen anything more beautiful than you," he responded, his voice thick with emotion. Their tender moment was interrupted by the sound of the medical bay doors sliding open. King Zorgax strode in, followed closely by the human diplomatic team. The Prylorian monarch's eyes widened as he took in the scene before him. "By the ancient seas," Zorgax exclaimed, "it seems the artifact has worked its wonders once again." Greg and Yaxa straightened, their hands and tentacles still intertwined. They stood tall, a living symbol of human Prylorian unity. King Zorgax's expression turned serious as he addressed them. "Diplomat Wells, Yaxa, your heroic actions and the successful defeat of the Zarkoth have ushered in a new era for our peoples. The time has come for us to formalize our alliance and work together towards a brighter future." The king paused, his gaze moving between Greg and Yaxa. "I propose the creation of a permanent joint council to oversee interspecies relations and collaborative scientific research, and I can think of no better leaders for this council than the two of you." Greg felt a surge of excitement at the prospect. He looked at Yaxa, seeing his own enthusiasm mirrored in her eyes. They nodded in unison. "We would be honored, Your Majesty," Greg replied, speaking for both of them. As the king and the diplomatic team began discussing the details of the new council, Greg's mind raced with possibilities. He and Yaxa would be at the forefront of human Prylorian cooperation, using their unique bond to bridge the gap between their species. He thought about the challenges that lay ahead, integrating their technologies, navigating cultural differences, and building trust between their peoples. But as he felt Yaxa's tentacles squeeze his hand reassuringly, he knew that together they could overcome any obstacle. The medical bay buzzed with activity as plans were made and communications sent out. Greg and Yaxa stood at the center of it all, their enhanced bodies a testament to the potential of human Prylorian collaboration. As the excitement died down and they found a moment alone, Yaxa turned to Greg, her eyes twinkling with a mixture of affection and mischief. "So," she said, her voice low, "about that thing between your legs I was so curious about." Greg felt heat rise to his cheeks, but he couldn't help grinning. "Well," he replied, matching her playful tone, "I think we have a lot to learn about each other yet." Their laughter filled the medical bay, a joyous sound that spoke of hope, unity, and the endless possibilities that lay ahead.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.